everybody, Michael Richards here with Elite Athletic Performance. I appreciate you guys coming back for the next installment of videos that we're doing. This one could be for coaches, and also if you're an athlete watching, I guess if you're a coach, the question that we're going to answer in this video is who really needs to be stretching. If you're an athlete, the question would be more along the lines of do I need to be stretching? Either way, the video will work for you. So we're going to go into flexibility. This is I feel like this is probably the most misunderstood concept in all of sports performance, in all of really the human body and movement and all that stuff. I just really feel like there is a huge disconnect in what's really going on and what people understand about it. So we'll get into it. As always, who am I? If you care, you can go check out our website. My background is on there and what we've got going on at EAP, stuff like that. As always, please like and subscribe. One of the things that I'm learning on the fly here is that Facebook and YouTube, well, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is owned by not Google, and Google owns YouTube. Well, they don't play nice together. And so the places that you would traditionally share information, if you know, like when we are doing, when we have on our Facebook page for the Elite Athletic Performance, we can see how many people have seen our every post. Like it actually gives you a little thing that tells you how many people have seen it. We usually get up around 800 to 1,000 with each post. If we share a YouTube link, it will not get over 100. Facebook is purposely burying the YouTube links in the algorithm so that people that would be interested in seeing these videos are never seeing them. So in order to combat that, even though it's really petty and gets on my nerves, there's nothing we can do about it. I would really appreciate you guys sharing this link with somebody, like texting it to a friend, somebody that you feel like would enjoy it or find it useful. That is a way around that. That's a real big problem with this. First world problems, but that is something that we're running into, so I would really appreciate it if you would personally share this with somebody. Obviously, like and subscribe. That would be a huge help. So the devotional, or what I usually do right here is a devotional. I got away from that this week. I just wanted to share these books. If you're a business owner, for sure, start with why. Absolutely. I mean, short of the Bible, that book changed my life in ways that I can't even, it was completely life altering. The way that I handle our business, the way that I advertise, the way that we do our social media, all that stuff goes back to what I learned from that book. And then if you are a coach, Atomic Habits and the Power of Habit, those are way more probably up your alley. I really feel like everybody can benefit from Start With Why, but if you are a business owner or have maybe thoughts of opening something in the business world, that would be one that I would highly, highly suggest on how to talk to your target market and to find your target market and things like that. So,
hey, what's up, guys? Just wanted to tell you about a new way to support our channel and to get great products out there. We've got an affiliate link going with Mark Pro now. You guys know that we use these a lot in gym. Big believer in them. The way that they decrease soreness and help with muscle soreness, things like that. These are actually like, you know, what we used to think about with the flush runs and stuff like that. These are actually doing something similar to that. They're a really good product. If you use our affiliate link or our code, actually, whenever at checkout, you can use EAP LLC and you will get 10% off of your purchase. So I appreciate you guys using that. We'll get back to the video.
getting into the video. So first off, let's get on the same page about a few things. And the first one that we kind of need to talk about and get taken care of is we really need to stop using the term stretch when we are talking about warming up. I realize that is nitpicky. I am not a nitpicky type person, and to a fault, actually. I'm way more of a libertarian, live and let live type person, but this is actually accidentally causing a little bit more damage than I think some people realize. So like you guys, the college coaches, the high school coaches, when you say go stretch, you mean warm up, and warm up is usually what happens. What's happening is that's trickling down to the youth coaches, and they've got 8-year-old kids literally doing static stretches before they go out and practice and play. So what we want to be careful about, and if you're watching this and you aren't, I know everybody's heard the term don't stretch a cold muscle, you only stretch warm muscle, stuff like that, and that's true. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, and I use this demonstration a lot. I have 2 rubber bands here, and some of you probably already know where I'm going with this, but I have 2 rubber bands here. The rubber band, its athletic job is to be strong and powerful and fast, pop people's skin, shoot across the room, hold stuff in place, stuff like that. So if I take this, it's about to compete in its athletic event by being strong and fast, and that is definitely not comfortable when I thump my thumb with it. So that one is ready to go. I just picked it up. I didn't warm it up, obviously, because it's not a perfect analogy, but I used it, went straight into the athletic event that it was designed for, and it was great. It did fine. Now I'm going to take this one and I'm going to stretch it, and I'm going to get it ready for the athletic event that we're going to do. All right, it's good and stretched now. It's done significant stretching. It's done what its coach told it to do. It's stretched. Okay. Well, this rubber band is not able to perform its role nearly as high a level as that other rubber band. So we robbed this rubber band of its potential, of its ability to be explosive and powerful. And that's what happens with the tendons and ligaments, muscles, things like that when you static stretch before an athletic event. You rob it of its ability to perform at a higher level. That, and you also, if this were a tendon or ligament, this is a much weakened, the tension in that tendon and ligament is there in order to hold joints in place and keep things stable. So if you have a person that is weak, they already don't have a lot of muscle strength to make that happen. You now have taken this rubber band and it does not have the ability to hold things stable like it's meant to do, like it's supposed to do. So you actually have increased probability of injury by stretching before you go out for your athletic event. The only people that really need to do a whole bunch of static stretching are people that sit at a desk for a living. That's about the only time, and even then it's questionable depending on the person and depending on what condition they're in at that particular time. So static stretching is, movement is always king. So keep that in mind. Static stretching, you're not lengthening the muscles. We don't want to do that, especially not before an athletic event. So keep that in mind. If you still use stretching, that's something that we do need to be careful with. So next thing to get on the same page about, why do people stretch? If somebody goes in and they stretch, they are whether they know how to verbalize this or not, they are searching for increased ranges of motion, right? A range of motion is like from here to here. That's a range of motion right there. So they are searching for increased ranges of motion. Increased ranges of motion are not the holy grail of sports performance like some people think they are. If they were, then breaking a bone would make you better at sports because you immediately gain range of motion when you break a bone, right? So you've got to be careful about that line of thinking. Increased ranges of motion, like I've said before, one of the few things that I didn't steal from other coaches is that flexibility without stability is a liability, right? And stability without flexibility is, that is a stiff person. But you've got to be able to control that range of motion in order for it to be usable. If you just create range of motion that isn't usable, that you can't control with your strength, that's just like a broken bone, and it's another injury waiting to happen. If you can't control your joint, obviously that's not gonna go well for you. So, all right. So how did we get here? Personally, I believe it's mainly sensationalism that's caused this, and I feel like sensationalism is the boogeyman for a lot of bad things or misinformation that go on a day-to-day basis with society. I believe that people view flexibility and a person that is mobile. I feel like sometimes people see the weight room and strength training and things like that. They see muscles as bulky accessories to the human body, and they don't understand that they are literally the driving force for movement. And I feel like when because pendulums in society always swing, when a person is thinking about weightlifting, strength training, things like that, they see that 90s bodybuilder, Ronnie Coleman, that looks like he can't even wipe his butt, and that is what they immediately think of when you think of strength training, or you think about lifting weights, things like that. They envision that is what's going to happen to the athlete. And so where does the pendulum go? It swings over here to this mobility, lightweight movement type thing, where that is where that lands for a lot of people. And there are thought processes in especially the baseball world of being too tight or too this or too that, which I've always laughed about, that the people that would tell you in the 90s that weightlifters or that baseball players didn't want to lift weights were the same ones that were trying to get Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds banned for life from baseball because they used steroids. They used a drug to make their muscles bigger and stronger and go out and hit absolute tanks every time they played. So I always thought that was kind of funny. I mean, I really don't think Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds were doing much yoga. Let's put it that way, right? And they're some of the greatest hitters that's ever lived. Steroids or not, I'm sorry, they were. So that is all something that we just have to stop and be like, wait a minute, is what I'm thinking really making sense? So got to be careful with that. That's one of the ways that we ended up here into thinking that is, and honestly, weight room type stuff, strength training is it's just feels a little, some people are just not comfortable with it. Yoga, stretching, that is something that is more calm. They feel like it is a way to not get injured and still do something that will make them better at sports, which I could argue that I disagree with that. There's a lot of people that absolutely wreck their lower backs doing yoga when they overstretch people that are already weak, and they're I've heard physical therapists talk about yogis keeping them in business because of their lower backs and things like that. So there's always a pendulum, like I said, there's always a pendulum swinging there you got to be careful of. So the other thing, how did we get here? This is a big one. People think that stretching fixes injuries, and nothing could be further from the truth. You have to be the only exception to this rule is if you have, for instance, actually me, our physical therapist, I have a hamstring tweak that's been bothering me. It's getting a lot better now, but our physical therapist uses a particular type of stretching with my hamstring, and he's the one that administers it on me when he is here. He is qualified to do that and make that decision, and he is the one that's actually doing the stretch on me. That is an exception to that rule just because I'm so tight, and there is an area of my hamstring that is super gritty and super tight, and he is working on that particular area. It's a very specific technique that he's using. Telling somebody to, quote, stretch out an injury when they have pain, we never, ever, ever stretch pain. Do not do it. Don't listen to it. Don't do it. Don't fall for that. Somebody that is telling you to go stretch out an injury is basically telling you they don't know the answer to your problem, which is that's acceptable. It's okay to not understand what an injury is. We can't all diagnose injuries on the fly. And if you're an AT, a physical therapist, a coach, you know how kids are, athletes are. Hey, what do you think this is? Well, I'm not a doctor. I don't know. So, the answer, instead of saying, I don't know, a lot of times kids go stretch it out. Don't do that. Don't tell your kids to do that. If you've got a cut on your hand, the last thing you want to do is keep pulling that skin apart. That's what stretching an injury is doing. You've got to immobilize that and get that over with. You might be stiff and need stretching once the injury is healed. You might need that, but until the injury is healed, no stretching. You've got to immobilize. That is not immobilizing, all right? So movement is one thing, stretching is another. There might be a time for movement if it's just a tweak or something like that to keep an ankle moving or something like that. But as far as stretching an injury, stay away from it, all right? All right, so there are 3 questions that I ask when I'm trying to figure out if an athlete should be stretching or what they're gonna do for their warm-up and their cool-down, which obviously nobody's gonna stretch in their warm-up, but there'll be some movement, some dynamic warm-up type stuff that you'll want to look at and use. But for the most part, the hypermobile ones will live on a foam roller, things like that, for warm-ups and cool-downs. So, and actually for the hypermobile athletes, we'll get into this a little bit, I actually use some stability stuff for their warm-up and their cool-down just to get some extra strength work, because that's what they need to stabilize their joints. So first off is the hypermobile athlete. And this is the main thing that I want to know when an athlete walks in the building, is if they are hypermobile or not. So your hypermobile people are your double jointed people. They're the ones that I joke that they can lick their own back and stuff like that. Like they're floppy messes, and they are huge ranges of motion. Like I said, double jointed, all that stuff. You look like you could just absolutely bend them in two and fold them up and put them in a suitcase. You got, like, those are the ones that you really need to know what you're doing when you are having them warm up and cool down, and you know, the type of movements they perform in the weight room, stuff like that, you know. So and I know what you're kind of thinking. You're like, how am I sure?
I'm going to tell you all about another quick way to support our page, our channel, and keep this free content coming out. You can go over to our Patreon page and sign up to do a $5 a month membership, or a $10 or $25, and actually I think there's a $50. Never mind. So we're working on ways to thank you for these, but we have people that just want to support, and it is greatly appreciated. That would keep this content coming out and move it out a lot faster, so we could hire some of the production costs to be done. These videos take about 20 hours of dedicated work to get done, so any help you can get that would speed that process up, we would really appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys watching. We'll get back to it.
What is it doesn't have to be a relative term. There is a test that I used to use. I actually don't even have to use it anymore, because once you see it, you can see it really easily. But there's a thing called a Baton Hypermobility Test, or Baton Hypermobility Score, or questionnaire, that you can find online. And if somebody will remind me in the comments, I'll link it here, because I promise I'm going to forget by the time this thing gets done editing and all that. I'll link in the description to that test. It's 5 questions. The more yeses you are, the more mobile you are. And your hypermobile people will be hard yeses on all 5. So that way you'll know, and even if they're like a hard yes on 4 and a yes on, you know, one of them, they're still hypermobile. If they're pretty well yeses, then you've got a hypermobile person. So the second thing I want to know is the athlete weak, just generally speaking. When I look at that kid, that athlete, am I thinking they're weak? Do they look frail? Stretching that type of person is flirting with fire, because it's like, you know, you wouldn't, if you had a droopy earlobe, you wouldn't hang a 5-pound earring from it. You know what I'm saying? To fix it. Like, that thing needs stability. It needs tightened up. It doesn't need to be pulled out. How would you possibly fix something that is loose by stretching it? You know, so you got to be very careful. You will pull their joints out of socket if you're not careful. I mean, that's what we're dealing with there. The other thing is, on the weak athletes, if you've got a skinny, stiff kid that you're like, man, he or she is stiff, they can't squat fully or whatever, you know, that is protective stiffness. That's like if you've ever been in a go-kart that has a governor switch on it, you can only go 15 miles per hour or something like that. This is God's version of a governor switch inside of our bodies. And basically, say you've got this 15-year-old kid that's this big around, they're a catcher. I've actually had this scenario play out before. It was a catcher, and the kid, there's no way he was stiff. He weighed like 130 pounds. Like, he hasn't lived long enough to build up old man stiffness, you know. But he did. He looked very uncomfortable behind the plate. He couldn't squat down properly. It was just how in the world he ended up being a catcher, I really don't know. But anyway, so I'm looking at his dad and mom are telling me, like, he's stiff, he needs to stretch, you know. And I'm like, I get where they were coming from, but I'm like, there's just no way that this kid is stiff. So I started kind of investigating, well, if I just laid him down and, like, you know, moved his legs, his hips were like, it was like gum, you know, like they were floppy, you know, so he wasn't stiff. It was protective stiffness, because his body knew if he got down in a deep squat, it was not strong enough to get out of it without something breaking. So we just started squatting, and I put back squats in his program. He did that. He didn't box squat or anything like that for a while. We built his bottom range, and I mean, we started from the ground. It was body weight squats holding onto a rack. And then the next week he started working his hands off. And then the week after that, he's added a dumbbell, and we did some goblet squats and worked our way up to where he could squat, 135 pretty deep. And all of that went away once he was able to squat and get in and out of that squat whole, and was strong enough to keep himself from breaking something. He was fine. So, and then 3, this is the big one, and of course I've got tight or loose up there, and then loose or tight. That's the type of stuff that bothers me, that drives me crazy. So I want to know if the athlete is a loose or a tight mover. Okay, so the best way to look at that when you're trying to figure all of this stuff out is a loose versus tight mover, the loose versus tight mover spectrum. Okay, and so what you're looking at is like, a spectrum is like, it's not a continuum. It stops right here and it starts over there, or vice versa, whichever way you want to look at it. The best, most productive place to be is in that green box right there in the middle. That's where, honestly, that's where every strength coach is trying to pull. Every strength coach's work is worth his salt, at least, his or her salt, is trying to get every athlete as close to that green box as possible. And that's really what it all boils down to. If you're just trying to build athleticism, and there are spectrums for speed and strength, there are spectrums for, pretty much any athletic endeavor that we're trying to come across, that we're trying to get to, you could look at it as a spectrum, and the middle is where we want to be, unless it's like velocity or, days gone fishing or whatever, where there's not too much of one good thing. Like anything where there is too much or too little involved, it will be on a spectrum. So, your hypermobile people, the ones that are 5 hard guesses, will be all the way on the left side over there in that hypermobile area. And those are the ones, the reason I talk about that all the time is because if you've got a hypermobile person, a person that lives over there in that red box on the left side, the hypermobile area over there, that is the one that if you're not careful with what you have them doing, you can have a negative impact on their career moving forward. You can cause injuries with the wrong thing. Pretty much everybody else on this spectrum, whether it's foam rolling, stretching, things like that, honestly, there's some things that are going to work better for them than others. There's some things that are going to be more productive than others for the ones that are in this area. But you're not gonna set an injury in motion with them by having them stretch or foam roll or whatever. Those hypermobile ones over there, if you have them following the same stretching routine that you have somebody that lives over here on the right following, they will set an injury in motion very quickly. So you've got to have, if you're gonna have stretching, like cool down stretching at the end of a workout or a practice or whatever in your programming, you really need something different for the hypermobile people. What I would do if I was going to break my team up, I would have 2 different buckets, maybe 3 if I really wanted to get into it. I would start with 2, and I would be like, okay, I would perform the height and bait and hypermobility test on them if I wanted to, but honestly, after you see it for a little while, I can walk up to anybody and I can grab their forearm just like this and shake it a little bit, and a hypermobile person, their wrist will go straight down. It'll be a 90-degree angle right there every single time. And that's really all I need to know. That gives me everything I need to know about how mobile they are. And believe me, looking at my wrist right there, and then if you do it to somebody that's hypermobile, like you see how mine does, it just continues on. I'm so stiff, like mine doesn't even go there like that. You'll know it looks like one of those skeletons at a doctor's office that's like they can carry, or in college, in med school or whatever, where they can roll the skeleton around and they give it a name and all that. Like that's what it looks like when you hold their hand up like this and it just dangles like that. That's a hypermobile person. Believe me, when you see it, you'll be like, yeah, that is not a wrist that I need to be stretching. So what I would do is I would take your hypermobile people, and if they're even if you're kind of questioning it, like you're like, I think they might be hypermobile, I would put them in the hypermobile bucket and just keep them there. And I would have a foam rolling routine, soft tissue, and some single leg stability work, having them stand on one leg and toss tennis balls back and forth to each other to build a little bit of extra stability, monster walks, stuff like that. That's how I would warm, and I would warm them up the same probably. Just have, because I wouldn't stretch anybody for a warm up. And then when they're cooling down after the workout or after the practice, I would have things for the hypermobile people to do, like I said, foam rolling, things like that. And then I would have your stiff and tight movers over here doing your normal cool down, what we call mobility cool downs. If you wanted a third bucket, you could have, you know, with the people that are the green, and these are going to be your best athletes right here in the green. These are that's your CC Sabathias of the world, and you know, the ones that are the perfect mixture of everything, you know, like, or the big boys, I should say, the big boys that will surprise you every now and then. You're going to think they're going to be stiff movers, and then they can go palms down on the ground, touching the ground with hands flat with their knees straight. You got to be careful sometimes and don't guess on some of these, like the big boys, because some of them, the CC Sabathias and the Bartolo Colognes of the world will surprise you, and they are out there. There's more of them than you would expect. But you could have a mixture. I would do a hybrid of the stretching, light stretching, and foam rolling and stuff like that if I wanted a third bucket for those. But believe me, like, you're not going to have a ton of those because those are your best athletes. Maybe you do, and you've just got a really, really good team. But anyways, so considerations to keep in mind, and honestly, this is probably going to end up being an entire video, but I'll go over it real quick. Active versus passive range of motion. This is really the concept you need to understand when you're talking about why I don't like stretching for a lot of people, or why I'm so careful about it. So when you have a person that has a lot of passive range of motion, okay, that is going to be your, you know, particularly hypermobile people. A passive range of motion is like, if I take, you know, or say somebody's unconscious for surgery or something like that, if you could take my arm, which it will not do, but if you were to be able to take my arm and go and pull it back here, you manually could pull it back to where it's parallel to the ground. We'll call this 0, so that would be 90 degrees if you could get it parallel to the ground right there. If I could make my fingertips point to the floor, that would be 180 degrees from here, right? Well, obviously I don't have that, but if you were to pull my arm down parallel to the floor to a 90-degree angle right there, but I couldn't get there by just doing this, that is your passive range of motion, all right? So then, if I got right here, and I could go to 45 degrees on my own, right there, that 45 degrees is your gap between your active and your passive range of motion. And you want to keep that gap as low as possible. The ones that have a massive gap between their active and their passive ranges of motion are the ones that you got to be careful with. Those are the ones that have a bunch of uncontrollable range of motion. They're not strong enough to keep that range of motion safe. All right. So that is why you need to understand that moving forward. All right. So. We already covered this, things to not do. Do not stretch an injury. So you got to be careful with that. I already went over that. Don't put every athlete in the same bucket. We already went over that too. Got to be very careful. They're not the same. And like I said, if you do that, you're going to end up with some hypermobile athletes in the bucket of the ones that need to be stretching. And like I said, they don't need to be stretching. So to answer the question that we started off with, the very first slide that we started off with, to answer that question, should you be stretching? The best route to take on that is going to be to go through the Bateman Hypermobility Score. If you're an athlete asking that question, take the Bateman Hypermobility Score. Remind me in the comments to link that test. Go through that, get an idea of it. Like I said, if you are double jointed, then you don't even have to take the test. I promise you, you don't need to be stretching. If you're a coach, these are the final thoughts that I forgot to put on a slide. If you're a coach and you coach female athletes, I'm gonna be honest with you, I would never stretch a female athlete. I wouldn't let them stretch. I wouldn't do it. I've only met one female athlete in my entire life of over 20 years now that needed to stretch. And I say athlete, she's actually a grown woman. She's stiff. She's the only one I've ever met that's stiff. The rest of them have plenty of mobility, and they are not gonna like it. They're not gonna like it. They want to stretch. Quick rule of thumb to keep in mind, anybody that loves to stretch probably doesn't need to be stretching. Anybody that hates it probably does. That's a really easy way to keep that in mind, to know who needs to stretch and who doesn't. If you coach female athletes, they're gonna fight you on that because they like to stretch, they're good at it. Remember, there are two types of people in the world. There are Vikings and there are ballerinas. The ballerinas need to be in the weight room, but they don't want to be because they're not good at it. They want to they want to stretch. The Vikings need to get out of the weight room and start stretching more. They don't want to do it because they're not good at that. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that answers your questions. If there are any more questions you have, leave them in the comments for me. Let me know what you think, and we'll be stay tuned for the next video. I appreciate you guys watching.